Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing a turn-by-turn of Thunderhill West 2 mile. The vehicle I chose to base this off of was my buddy Daniel's car. It's an E36 M3, and it's kind of a good benchmark of kind of the average car you'd see at a track day. So I thought it would be a bit more accurate to kind of, base all of this off of a more attainable car, rather where my E36 is a bit too capable, in my opinion, to compare it to the majority of cars you see at a track event. And I don't want to use a lap that's too fast, as it would be kind of hard to really, kind of break it down and make it a simple explanation turn by turn, where, a car that's going very quick is a little harder to kind of explain what's going on, the kind of inputs that are being made. And it's just also not really a good idea, in my opinion, to set that as the benchmark for the average enthusiast that will bring his car to the track. I think this is a great car and it's set up very well. There are no real setup flaws, which make it really easy to do an accurate turn-by-turn at this track, where, the way I drive the track isn't skewed too much by the handling characteristics of the car. So to start off, we are currently in the second to last corner. This is kind of just we're about to start the lap. It's good to note that there are different ways to manage this track. There are different ways to tackle each corner. It kind of depends on the vehicle and the driver. And, there's multiple ways to do it right, but there is a pretty good baseline of what is right and what is not. So we're kind of going to go off of that, and I guess this is more so my version of how you would take this track. So don't take it too literally. You should go try it on your own. But this is kind of just here to help you, hopefully. Since I have a lot of experience here, I think I have found little things here and there that do help, even if they are very, very minute things. So heading onto the front straight, there's something that I always tell people, which is you gotta kind of think about the end of the straight more than the beginning of the straight. If you try to enter the front straight too quickly, I guarantee you're going to lose that mile an hour at the end of the straight. So it's very important to prioritize your exit. And a lot of people at this track like to come out very wide on exit here, and they end up kind of going out into the tire wall, and that kind of increases your turn radius, and that also increases the distance you have to travel. Not only that, but it can get a little bit sketchy if you're getting too close to that wall and you're trying to get on power into the front straight. I believe that there's a different line for a higher horsepower car, front wheel drive car, and a lower horsepower car going through this turn. And in this case, we're looking at a kind of a medium power rear wheel drive car. So it's kind of a combination of trying to be careful and trying to, maximize our speed at the end of the straight by minimizing, rotation, minimizing scrub, and just getting a clean exit is our priority here. So you'll see I only really started applying throttle once I was almost fully straightened out, because it's really important to get that power down in a tidily manner. And as you can tell, I also chose kind of, in the middle of the exit here, which is kind of what you want to do in a car like this. It doesn't have quite too much power to where you're struggling to put it down, but it also doesn't have too little, where if you cut that radius too tight coming out of that apex, you won't be able to put the power down right. So I'm kind of, threading the needle in the middle and, kind of riding straight over those two white lines. And what that gives me is it gives me the perfect balance of exit speed and grip to where I can really maximize the potential of the car in the straight. So turn one, coming over this berm, it really depends on the vehicle you're driving, but what I kind of like to do is either stay on throttle or do a gentle lift and then get back on throttle before that braking zone. It's really all about keeping the car stable, and when you're turning in here at a high rate of speed, that bump feels more like a pothole when you're hitting it. And if you've driven this track, you know what I'm talking about. It's a very aggressive impact, especially if you're on stiff suspension. Like I said, Daniel's car is kind of a street car, so it handles this really well. I'm able to stay on throttle, but obviously lift partially, and then set myself up for that braking zone. So there are two or three ways you can take this right turn, and it really depends on the level of grip that your car has. I find myself usually on the far left to start my turn in, or in the middle, depending on how low horsepower the car is. Because remember, the more power you have, kind of the more radius you need to put that power down, unless you're fully straightened out. So when I'm coming into here, in Daniel's car, I'm kind of taking the tighter line because I know it's got the mechanical grip to horsepower ratio to where I can keep this tidy and keep the rear in check and kind of shorten the distance I'm traveling here. And this is kind of a place where it's up for debate, but I believe that mounting that next curb isn't necessarily faster because it might kind of cut off your exit too much. I like to brush it a little bit and kind of ride the grip and kind of see where it takes me from here. But what you want to do is avoid staying too far to the left here, because once it takes you out wide on the left side, you kind of have to fight to get the car back onto the racing line. So once I'm in this general area is where I'm usually treating it as a very short straight. So once I'm kind of straightened out here, I kind of roll straight into power here, and that kind of helps me transition into this left-hander where I will lift off the throttle a little bit, and that will help me turn the car into the left. So once we're in turn two, it's kind of a battle here between understeer and oversteer for most people, and a lot of people like to be impatient and they will stay on the throttle here quite frequently. And they'll overdo it, and the front will start pushing, and instead of listening, they'll kind of push through it, and that really ruins your setup for that long straight. And straights are extremely important, but what's more important than the straight is the corner before the straight. So what we want to do here is we want to maximize the front grip of the car so we can get it turned in, and the best way to do so is to just ride that fine line of grip and don't get too greedy. There's also a tiny dip coming up close to the exit of this corner where, if you're experiencing, front end push, it's a good place to lift a little bit and let the rear end kind of, do its own thing. It'll rotate a little bit coming out of that bump, and that bump can help you a lot with pointing you in the right direction coming into that straight. So this is kind of everyone's Achilles heel at this track, in my opinion, because everyone is very afraid of it. And personally, me too, I get pretty uncomfortable with this turn because, it's not really a turn. It kind of feels like you're hitting a massive pothole on 880. So what I do for the Dorito or the kink, whatever you want to call it, is I like to keep the car as straight as possible when I'm going through it. What I mean by that is keep the steering wheel straight. I've seen a lot of people go off left, right. I've seen people flip the car here, and it's not the safest corner, and you got to kind of think about the repercussions of entering it with the wheels, turned to the left or to the right. Since it is a compression zone, if you enter it with the wheel turned, once the car settles, it's going to want to go in the direction you're pointing the wheel. And the only direction we want to go through here is as straight as possible. So usually this is where you get spit out. If you do the kink correctly, you're kind of in the middle of the track, kind of leaning towards the left. This is a not so great place to be to set up for the next turn 4. So where we want to be is kind of mid to right track, so kind of 3/4 out on the track. And this really, helps us set up for the next turn. And, if you're too far left, you're really going to have to, cut the radius on that turn, and you're going to end up, fighting the car more than you want to get it to turn. So what I do is I kind of come out naturally to the right. I don't force anything on the car. I just gently let it come out to the right. And, this is where I'll brake, lift, whatever input I do, depending on the car I drive, to get the front and the rear to kind of comply going into this left turn. And, once you're on this curb, it's kind of important to, look ahead of you and think about where you are going. Unfortunately, it's a tricky corner where a lot of people will kind of see this image and think, well, now I just got to straighten out the wheel. No, you have to wait. You have to have patience, and you have to wait until, you're kind of halfway through that berm, and then you can go straight. Right now, it is still a turn, and, you got to keep turning. Otherwise, your exit is going to be into the dirt there. So I try to keep it very tight on this left berm here, as always, to maximize the straightness of the track rather than trying to force the car to go around it. And that'll kind of, if you do this correctly, it'll spit you out perfectly onto the berm on the right. So kind of just like that, and once you exit here, you're going to start thinking about the setup for the next turn, which is a kind of, it's a sweeping right-hander, and there's a berm that you want to be on. And, if you're not on it, you're in the wrong spot. So kind of, the consensus is you kind of want to stay all the way to the left here if possible. And you have to be mindful about where your exit's going to be. You have a kind of a small window here to, make this right turn stick correctly. And once you're on this berm, it's really about, straightening the car out as soon as you can so you can lay on the power, considering that this is technically a straight. For a lot of cars, this is a straight where you're going to be full throttle. And, like every straight, you got to prioritize that corner beforehand. So as you can see, I'm almost already fully straight, and I will waste no time straightening the car back out so I can get on the power. So heading into turn 6, there's a few options of where you want to be on the track, and I think it really depends on how much aero you have, how much grip you have, how much power you have. My fruit of thought here is to stay mid-track or 3/4 out, and slowly wind the wheel into that corner where you eventually want to kind of hug that curb tight on the left. You don't want to mount it, and you don't want to be too far to the right, because turn 6 is going to want to throw you all the way off to the right. And it's very hard to see the exit of that corner because it's pretty blind. So you want to stay as far left as you can to kind of maximize how far you can go to the right on your exit. And as you can see, it is a blind corner coming out of here. So you don't see the curb. You don't really see much other than, a gap between, the track ahead of you and the track that's below you. So you have to, this is one of the corners where you kind of have to do it a few times. And, I tell everyone, don't go all out here the first time you go out there, because, you don't know where the blind corners go. You need to kind of, learn a good way to remember where they are. And, you can trust cones all you want. They put cones out there sometimes, but that doesn't mean the cone can't get knocked over, pushed to the wrong spot. it's kind of a thing where I think you need to learn it as memory, and eventually it'll kind of just click and you'll know how far you have to go out to nail this curb. And it's a pretty nasty drop if you miss it. So coming into this braking zone, this is kind of where roughly where you want to start downshifting and scrubbing speed. And it really depends on kind of the braking capabilities of the car. But this turn messes up a lot of people because it's a very tight turn. It's a 180 turn, and it's going straight into an uphill. And because of that, it's very important to nail it because, especially on the lower horsepower cars that can't compensate with horsepower, that hill will get you. And if you scrub too much speed, and if you take it the wrong way, and your exit is poor, then you really do miss out on a lot of time coming up that hill. So in this clip, I kind of induce a little bit of excessive oversteer, but a little bit of rotation through this corner is very helpful in my opinion, especially on cars that like to, by default push a little bit. I found that the BMWs like to do that a lot. The S2000s, in my opinion, handle this corner the best. Their turn-in is seamless, and you don't really have to do much negotiation with the car to make it through this turn smoothly. With some of the BMWs and the heavier cars I've driven, it helps to kind of guide the car through there with a little bit of rear end rotation, whether it's by giving it a little throttle, whether it's trail braking, whether it's there's a few different methods to do it, but I like to rotate the car because it's just it's the fastest way to turn the car through this corner. But you don't want to overdo it because you still want to have that out of corner grip where you want to get on throttle. And you want to use as much of this curbing runoff as possible without overdoing it, because that technically is track. That is room for you to use to put that power down more efficiently. And I like to ride it all the way to the end until I'm on the left side of the track, just because with the higher horsepower cars, the lighter cars with no aero, it's really hard to put power down around here. It's a very slow corner. It's a very tight radius corner, and I like to use as much of the track as possible here. So this turn, it's another blind turn at this track, and like I said, it takes repetition to really learn where it spits you out, kind of learn where you're going to be apexing, and you can stay flat in a lot of lower horsepower cars around here, but with the higher horsepower cars, you have to do a lot of practice to kind of get up to your comfort zone, because this is a pretty low grip corner. You're kind of coming up and around, and it spits you off on an off camber turn, and you don't really have too much room for error here, and it really matters where you turn in here, because that determines where you're going to be, where the track is going to spit you out on the exit. And you gotta practice this corner basically, time and time again, and eventually, it'll be pretty effortless, and you'll find little tricks here and there. Like if I have a car that likes to push a little bit, I'll actually, drop a wheel on that curb on the right. It'll kind of turn me in a bit better. And it's like, those are tiny little tricks here and there that you learn, based on, how many laps you've turned at the track. But kind of for beginners, I just recommend doing this corner over and over again, slowly making your way up to a comfortable pace. So once you're at this braking zone, you're almost always going to be, far left of the track, unless you're passing someone on the inside. But that doesn't really matter for what we are discussing. Once you're in this, general area and you're braking, this is where you have to decide if you're going to do a late apex or an early apex on this turn. I believe that the higher horsepower cars demand the late apex turn, because it's significantly easier to put power down on a wider radius turn than it is on a tighter one. And I believe in this car, I early apex it because I know it has more grip really than it does power, and it's something I can get away with. But if you have a higher horsepower car, you really need to prioritize that exit over the turning speed. Once I'm around here, it's when I start thinking about kind of, the small straight that's ahead of me. I know it looks like a turn, but if you take this right, you can take it as a straight for, a few seconds. And, it's a lot faster to drive this in a straight line than it is to go through it as if it was a regular corner. And, depending on how much track you use, you can actually use all of that curbing on the left, and that kind of shoots the car out into the last turn very, very well. But it takes a lot of practice, in my opinion, to execute it properly. And depending on the car you have, this method is probably not for you. This is probably works best with front-wheel drive cars, low horsepower rear-wheel drive cars. The higher horsepower cars are going to want the later apex than this one will. So once again, we're kind of at the last corner here, and when we're turning into it, we want to stay as far right as we can, because that will benefit our exit into the front straight. And again, we got to pick and choose of how tight you want to execute this turn, because that really will make or break your exit speed depending on the car you're driving. In this car, once again, I kind of take it down the middle, and it's kind of the sweet spot for where I can put power down, but I'm not taking too long of a turn to get to that point. And I really believe that saves you time overall. And, obviously I'm nitpicking. For beginners, it doesn't really matter too much. But once you kind of do a couple dozen laps or whatnot in the car that you own, you'll start realizing kind of the sweet spot of where you should be placing the car in this corner. Well, I hope that was useful for you guys. There's a few videos out there already on, kind of they're very good videos on a turn by turn at Thunderhill West. I just wanted to give my 2 piece and kind of see if I had anything else to offer in terms of knowledge of the track, or, small tips that might help. Obviously it's a well documented track at this point, and, it's one of my favorites because it's very complicated and tricky once you really get into it, and it becomes a challenge for the higher horsepower cars because it's such a tight track, and there's a lot of corners where you have to modulate throttle very aggressively in order to kind of maximize your lap time. So that's why like a few people say, like Joe McGuigan says, West is best, and I couldn't agree more, because it's a very technical track. It's very driver skill focused. I'm not saying other tracks aren't, but this one is, it's very technical, and, I think it takes a long time to really master this track, but once you do, it can be very rewarding.